present mode.
Yep. And here we
And
go.
friends attending the Emergency Home Learning Summit. My name is John Cassie, and I am the Director of Curriculum and Innovation at TVT Community Day School in Orange County, California. And I'm delighted to be sharing some thoughts with you on managing the home environment with my dear friend and colleague, Velear Schrupp, who is our Director of Media and Information, also at TVT Community Day School in Orange County, California. So thanks for joining us. We're delighted to have you, and we hope that when we get to the end of this, that you've got some suggestions, tools, and takeaways that you might use in your own work, regardless of what that work looks like. And we hope that you'll share your wisdom and perspectives and thoughts with us as you do the work, because we all can acknowledge that we are living in strange times. And this is one of the strangest times to be an educator. We're all learning together. And I look forward to hearing from you after you hear from us. So what we're talking about is building connection in the home environment and in a hybrid learning context. Now, depending on your school and the language that's being used, you might be encountering any one of these kind of more technical words. Our school is doing concurrent learning, which is to say, we have students who are live and in front of us, and we have students who are at home. We're teaching both of them at the same time in the same classroom. Now, you may find that you're in that kind of an experience. You may find that what you're doing is having to deal with some classes being like this, taught over Zoom. Other classes are being taught, in a way where all of the content is being loaded into some kind of learning management software tool or into Google or what have you. And you have to do it on your own with your teacher coming in whenever your teacher comes in. And in addition to those models, there are also flexible models that integrate some components of this with other components. Look, here's the important takeaway. Learning is still happening. We want to make sure that the tools we're using and the modalities we're using don't get in the way. Now, one of the problems with this, biggest problem, is when you're in live instruction, the building and forming of classroom communities is something that teachers know how to do and do well. But when you have some students in one place and others in a different place, and sometimes they're swapping, and sometimes it's hard to hear, and sometimes it's hard to see, and on, what we're seeing is a real challenge in creating and sustaining productive classroom cultures. And sometimes these cultures are not being established, which is not productive in any way to learning. And sometimes they're established, but they don't sustain. So what we want to talk to you today is, how do you manage that? How do you sustain that? And how do you build a nurturing learning place for students, whether they're in front of you or whether they're in a distance environment? Because one of the things that we know is, and this is a great surprise to many of us, but one of the things that we know is, some students who were struggling in the live environment are actually doing extremely well, far better in the distance environment than we would have anticipated, and vice versa. But even if that's true, and even if mostly what you're doing is asynchronous learning, where you're never interacting with peers, success is going to be partially predicated or largely predicated on how effective classroom cultures are built. So Valeria is going to talk a little bit about a variety of strategies to do that. And then I'm going to come back in and talk a little bit about how you as a teacher might deploy some strategies from a place you might not have expected to make this work. So, Velear.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important for us to sit in this one truth, and that is the ability for us to stay connected holds value. And having students and even educators feel seen, heard, and valued and secure plays such a big part in us moving forward in learning and teaching. But the thing to remember is that relationship building or community building, the building of SEL or social emotional learning skills, or EQ skills, which is emotional intelligence skills, don't have to be gigantic things. That can be these small moments, and it's the small moments that add up to make a really big impact. So I'm going to chat with us a little today about what to do after a check-in, and what is a check-in, and what are some of the other activities that look like. So check-ins. Check-ins are those moments. You can do them at the beginning of a class. You can do them at the end of a class. You can do it in the middle of a class. It can be tied to your curriculum. It could just be tied to getting to know a student or students, whether in the room or on a computer. And those moments are like glows and grows, or roses and thorns, are terms that I have used with students and other educators have used. And those are really moments of like, what worked well? What is an area that you'd like to improve on? Or how are you feeling today? What's something you're excited about? What's something that you're feeling a little hesitant or nervous about? They're great moments to either do for, again, like I said, that personal connections or curricular connections as well. They're great to check in for skill building. And they're very easy. They just take like a moment of time, truly, like a couple minutes is all you really need to do just to get a pulse, to get a feel of how something or someone is doing and how things are going.
Because if you don't do that, right, Velear? If you don't do that, you're gonna very possibly miss something that isn't where you'd want it to be with one of your students.
Right.
And if you do this, most young people, at least with regard to teachers, will reach out with something, a little nugget, right? That will make a teacher's, flag go up,
Yes.
right? Like, oh dear, I'm gonna have to circle back on that. Now, the check-in is short, but if you find something, that's where you want to get a kid on a Zoom and say, walk me through this. I'm seeing this. How are you feeling? Where are you now? This sort of thing, right? So it hopefully leads to the next step. Right?
Absolutely. The check-in definitely can lead to the next step and should lead to the next step. Even if you're doing something as silly as like, what ice cream flavor are you feeling like today? It's like just something like an icebreaker for the room, or, what animal, 1 to 4, just to get a pulse, to take the pulse of the room is really what some of these check-ins are, so that then you know how to ebb, right? You know how to engage with your students to know if a student is fully active and engaged in this moment or is having a hard time. And sometimes you can tell through body language and sometimes you can't. Right. So these are some really good, like, if you're a detective, these are the clues. These are the clues to help us to better reach our students and to help them feel this connectivity that we care about them more than just the grade, right? More than just our subject area, because we do. So how do we continue to build this connectivity? And how do we do that if we have to shift focus? John?
Now, one of the things that you might not be thinking about is, how do I, as the person on the other side of the screen, how do I keep my classes with me and with each other? And surprisingly, one of the best places to draw wisdom from is actually from the performing arts. Okay,
Absolutely.
now, right? Now, I mean, look, Valeria, you and I have spoken at length about the fact that if you're gonna be moving in a room, okay, like a physical environment, right?
Mhm.
You've got to physically move in that space, okay? And you have to be shifting your eyes. You have to be making sure that you see everyone and that they know that they're being seen, okay? Now, if you watch the great actors and the great speech makers, the great public officials and politicians who
Mhm.
are outstanding at building connection. Not all politicians are, but all great actors are, okay?
Yep. Good
One
start.
of the things that they do is make very strong eye contact. It's much harder to do in a digital environment than it is to do live. You have to be mindful of where the camera is. You
Mhm.
have to be mindful of the fact that the students you're working with, you may only be slightly bigger than a commemorative postage stamp on their screen where they have a bunch of other classmates. Okay. But if you're being looked at, you'll know it. Okay. So make sure to make that eye contact with your students. Shift where you're looking. When you're in a distance environment, when you're in a digital environment like this, one of the ways that I do it is I will quite literally I'll use the student's name, I'll point at the camera so that they see that I'm gesturing. Look, folks, I'm a big gesturer. This is going to be of no surprise to you. You've watched 15 minutes of this, and you can already see that I'm a big gestures guy. But you have to become one in this environment. You have to think of yourself more, not as a sage on a stage, but as a stage performer, okay? And what do they do? If you're acting in film, you make small gestures because you're going to be projected on a 90-foot screen. But if you're acting on the stage and you need the people in the balcony to figure out what you're doing, think about it. If you've been to a theater, show and you've been up in the balcony, you know that the stage is small. It's the same thing.
Absolutely.
So gesture far bigger than you would otherwise think to. Speak much more clearly and deliberatively
Mhm.
than you might otherwise, because you don't know what they're hearing and you don't know how they're hearing you, okay? Think about all of the sensory components of learning and engagement. Finding ways to encourage participation builds connection between your students and each other, and connection between your students and you. Now, I am not telling you use breakout rooms, okay? I make a podcast called Many Windows. In the last 9 weeks, we've been doing a series called COVID Considerations, where we're looking at different strategies for different types of people, parents, students, etc., to navigate this world. Velear was in fact on it on episode 3. You ought to go listen to it, manywindows.net. One of the students who came on said, look, faculty, enough with the breakout rooms, okay? Why? Because they actually discourage participation unless they are really skillfully scaffolded. And the teacher is essentially moving between those breakout rooms.
Mhm.
Because students find the act of having to participate in such a small place often very awkward, okay?
Absolutely. John, that you are reminding me of the importance of intentionality.
Yeah, yeah,
These acts have to be with great intention.
yeah, yeah. Everything that we're doing in this framework has to be motivated by a clear objective, a clear goal, and that goal has to be highly concrete. This is a more concrete kind of environment than an abstract one, right? Right. So finding ways to encourage participation could mean that you think about, gaming modalities, or you think about ways to divide your hours worth of time so that you have a certain number of kids in a Zoom with you, and when they're not with you, they're off screen or they're out of the Zoom doing something that they're going to have to come back in and share, or they're working in a doc or they're working in a spreadsheet. And you have, as the teacher, you have all the docs open and you can see that the participation is happening. Use your Chalk Talk protocols. Have students respond to questions, but not talk in those kind of environments, right? That's what's making students crazy about breakout rooms, is the expectation that absent guidance, that they carry the participation. That's very hard for some students. They're just not wound for that. But if you put them in a room and ask them to collaboratively respond to a prompt, you've got a better chance. Or, if in the day before you've said, all right, do all of you have the following kinds of materials at home? Do you have paper? Do you have a stapler? Do you have drinking straws? All right, so I'm going to need you to bring to class with you next time these materials. And I'm going to split you into a couple of groups that you're going to talk in a back channel. And I'm going to ask you to design something and build it and show it. But you're going to do it with low tech materials, at home, okay? Any of those things can be helpful to encourage participation. Last point I'll make is there's no downside, if you're an instructor, to being vulnerable in a vulnerable time. Share things that matter to you with your students. Share how you're making a go of making instruction during COVID time work. What you want to do is emphasize storytelling. You want to emphasize whatever communication capacity you can develop in your kids and that you can sustain through your own work. I think you've seen from the way that I've been talking about this, that your gesturing, your tempo, the way you ask questions, the way you reflect in the moment can make a huge difference in the way that students interact with you by means of a camera. You've got to love the camera, okay? If students see that you're not happy, they're going to disconnect, just like they would if they were in a live environment, okay? So figure out how to love the camera, and then look for ways to divide the time in a way where even if you are really great on the camera, there are plenty of times where your students are not on the camera and they're doing other things, but they're going to come back.
Absolutely.
Okay? Yeah.
And I think also, if you are a person that does not love the camera, and there's many people who do not feel comfortable being in front of the camera, then I would suggest shifting the mindset. It's not about you on the camera, it's about who's at the other end. And that is the student that you want to reach. So really focus on that. Instead of looking at like yourself and making that connection, think of it from the mindset of, it's not about me, it's about who's on the other side. And that's who I want to reach. And that's why I'm doing this. I am pushing through discomfort so that I can reach that other person. So they know that I am here for them. So they know I care about them and their learning. And that can sometimes, that shift in mindset can go a long way.
For sure, right? We all know that it's a sort of an artificial environment. right? And when we're doing things that feel like their artificiality is something that I'm bouncing off of, I always say lean into the artificiality of it. Of course it is. Okay? It's gonna feel a little awkward. Let it be awkward, as if your students aren't experiencing it as awkwardness. Own it, acknowledge it, make it part of what you're using to build connection. Can't go wrong.
Absolutely. And that's really what we keep coming back to, is the importance of building that connection. So here's some food for thought. Like, if you just take a moment to envision one of your classes, one of your periods, you know, a moment, a snapshot in time that you teach during the day, like, close your eyes and really think about, who are your students? Like, can you see their faces? You know, who are your outspoken students, your more reserved, your introverts, your self-conscious ones, you're ready to share wide awake at 8 a.m. or wide awake after lunch, or maybe a kind of sleepy, just depending on the period. But really see their faces, see them. What do you know about them? You know, how do they respond during that particular period of the day? And then really think about, how are you helping to connect and helping them to feel a part of the learning process? I mean, the learning process really is more than just like one-sided, right? We're all, like, students have a role to play. We have the role to play as educators, and together we come together to build upon our learning experience. So I think about, how am I ebbing? How am I communicating? I start with the I first before I look to like what my students can do. And when I can see them, I can see their faces, and I can think about their needs and maybe what they're going through, or how am I checking in? Then we can look at, like, how am I accommodating, right? Like, this is a tough time for all of us right now. And so there's a lot that a teacher is going through in their head. My gosh, I can't like hold one more thing. But at the root of all that we do, it's connectivity. And this is one of those moments to find a way to think about connecting and let our students know that we are really connecting with them. So, how to read a room, right? Even on a screen, you can pick up a pulse. You can pick up the energy of the room, so to speak. And sometimes you're going to notice during the day that, like, oh my goodness, like, I've lost them. They look really tired. They're super out of focus. They have a ton of energy, and I just don't know what to do with all of that. So here's some things you can do. Or the fact that you've been on, like, you have an hour class and it's like 30 minutes into it, and like everyone kind of needs a break from something. Some fun things to do that not only are fun, but also help you to build that sense of community, that connection that you really want. Rock, paper, scissors. I know it sounds silly, but it's so fun, and no matter what the age, someone loves a game of rock, paper, scissors. Would you rather?
I love all games, but rock, paper, scissors is dynamite.
Right?
And for advanced students, rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock.
Oh, hello.
Right?
Definitely.
Only for advanced students, though. You don't want to, too many interactions across the pentagram. Right?
Ready. Would you rather questions? 100 uses. Mindfulness, right? Mindfulness, breathing, stretching, attention focusing games. These are all things. So what I mean by that, there's something I really love to do with students to help kind of build some creative juices before some deep thinking happens. And it's this creativity warm up that takes maybe a minute or two. You get an everyday object. And here I have a pencil and some floss. And in a minute, students are to write down 100 uses, anything that they can think of, from the most obvious to the silliest of ideas. And that's just to, like, again, help get those creative juices flowing. It's fun. It builds skill set and creativity and deeper thinking. And it also lets you know it's okay to get stuck, because sometimes they get stuck, and that's part of the process too. And some people like flourish. So there's a lot of just those kind of fun moments just with everyday objects. Everyone's got something lying around, and that's the beauty of that. A mindful activity that I really like to do is actually the ringing of a bell. Like, so if you have a bell, if you have a chime, um, and the objective of this one is to build listening skills and empathy. So here's how that plays. You hold the bell up and you ring it. And when you no longer can hear it, you raise your hand or like indicate in some way that you can't hear it. The key, especially in this kind of learning environment, is to observe that everyone takes a different rate at not hearing the bell. And that we shouldn't be talking just because I don't hear the bell anymore. I'm giving space for that. We're all coming at this from a different lens, different perspective, different hearing. And that act alone, it's a very subtle thing. And this does not take long either, like a minute or two. That alone can really help build some connectivity of like, yeah, we are all different and that's okay. That is an okay thing, that we experience things differently. And just that lens alone can really go a long way. Mixing it up. I sometimes love the ridiculous, like you gotta be kidding me questions that you pose, or like sometimes even the more thoughtful ones of questions to ask. These types of things, from like the silliest to the more serious, right, are a great way to get to know your students. And it's a good thing to talk about mixing it up. Sometimes you'll use them at the beginning, maybe in the middle of class. Just take one and just kind of like whoever feels like sharing, like, would you rather? Would you rather eat pizza that has snails on it, or would you rather eat pizza with worms? It's obscure, but you have to pick one. You have to pick one, and it's silly and it's fun, and sometimes you just need that ridiculous moment. And I know that that sometimes feels like a tall order for people.
And we really are only talking about 90 seconds.
Absolutely.
Right. This is not a 10-minute conversation, right?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm seeing a little bit of a low energy thing. Okay. So now the question is, would you X or would you Y? Okay. And now we're going to use maybe a poll tracker, or maybe we're going to just show of hands or whatever. Absolutely. Right. And, if you pick a gross answer, I might call on you to explain. What are you thinking? Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And it can be good to laugh. Right now, we need some laughter, and some of those things are a great form of laughter. Or like it's okay that those responses come. Good. That's what they're there for. That's what they're there for. Other types of just moments of thinking breaks, right? There's actually these mindful cards. You don't need mindful cards, but like there are mindful cards. Then there's one I really like called the tap and the wiggle. And that is a great way to like get focus back in. Again, doesn't take long to do. It requires like the wiggling of your right hand, the wiggling of your left hand, the tapping of your right foot, the tapping of your left foot, and then wiggling the right hand, tapping the left foot at the same time, doing the opposite on the other side, and then shifting back and forth at different tempos and rates is a great way to like get the mind.
It's like you're rebooting your operating system.
Are rebooting your operating system.
Right. And you've got to spin your hard drive a little bit. Then it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm ready again.
Yep, good to go. And you play with the tempo on this. I've done this with preschoolers and I've done this with adults. Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. And sometimes it's also a nice moment to like laugh at ourselves. Like, oh my gosh, I can't do this at like super speed. I can only do it slowly. That's okay too. That's okay too. It's not right or wrong. And that's something important to share with students though. There is no right or wrong with this. It's just the effort of doing.
Right. So look, George Couros, one of the great contemporary thinkers in education and innovation. The operative word for you here, certainly the operative word for Velear and I as we conduct our professional practice here at TVT in Southern California, is lean into process. And once you've decided to accept what you already know that this year is going to be about the process of making it work, okay? Once you've done that, then the road to giving yourself some grace and some professional and personal slack, the road is open, okay?
Yeah.
Most of us 9 months ago felt really confident in what we were doing, our processes, our perspectives, and we were building from a really solid, what we felt was a really solid foundation, and using a scalpel to sculpt rather than using our hands and kind of getting in there to get the big forms in good shape. But what we're doing now is, okay, I'm spinning clay at the wheel. I'm not making minute edits. I'm building the actual structure. That's what a process is. Accept it, lean into it. Take some delight in it if you can. But never forget that that's where we are. And no matter what we want, doesn't matter. This is where we are.
Absolutely. And just that mindset alone, like, goes back to the whole message of
Yeah.
today, right? Is
Yeah.
building connection, building community, relationships, relationships, relationships. And that's
Yeah.
a process. Like, that's not a, I can check the box because I, did one fun activity or I asked one, check-in or exit. It's ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, every other day, letting somebody know that you value them and you're happy that they're there.
Yep. Yep.
We've definitely got some fun resources out there for sure. Things that we've found inspiring, right, John?
Absolutely. And what you're going to find is at the if you click on the link that provides you with the slides for this presentation, you'll see that there's about 10 slides that we're not going to talk about that have links to articles and perspectives and practices and handbooks and what have you that we think will be of great value to you.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the tips from our lower school, middle school, and upper school, Velear and I are at your service. We want to connect with you. We want to learn with you. We want to use this opportunity to build ever broader and deeper communities of professional adult learners. And you can find me at jcassie@tarboot.com, and Velear is at vschrupp@tarboot.com. And you can find me on social media and blah, blah, blah as well. I answer email. So if you write, I will respond. And I look forward to meeting you and learning with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in.
Yeah.
This has been fun, John.
Totally. Can't wait to do it again.
Indeed.
All right.
All right.
Until next time.
Bye.